Okay, I'm going to break this drawing down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine, so that you can have a go, create this, and amaze yourself. Okay, as explained in the intro, I'm going to break this down into steps so that not only you learn about the painting process and techniques, but also about the app that I'm using, Procreate. But that isn't to say that you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. Having said that, within the app Procreate, I'm using their default A4 canvas, which may be different in different regions, so take a note of the dimensions, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. Also, the color profile by default is one of Procreate's color profiles, and it's the sRGB code, the one that ends in 2.1 on the list here. I'm also using Procreate's default brushes. So within inking, I'm going to use the Studio Pen. Within airbrushing, I'm going to use the soft, the medium, and the medium hard brush. Within charcoals, I'm going to use the burnt tree brush. Within elements, I might use the clouds brush. Within luminance, the light pen. And within organic, I'm going to use the rainforest brush. And then in terms of the colors, I've already pre-selected a color palette that I think is suitable. Each of these colors, if you go to the value section, has what we call a hexadecimal code associated with it. Each of these codes is down in the video description, so you just need to copy and paste them one at a time into this box and press enter. The color will appear up here, and then you can tap it together with all the other colors into the color palette and create it for yourself. Alternatively, next to the codes in the description is a link that takes you to my Patreon page, where you can download the color file for free. And Patreon is also the place that you can support this channel and gain access to exclusive content such as extended versions of most of these tutorials. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people who do support me over at Patreon. It really does make a huge difference. Again, a link for that is down in the description. And with all of that said and done, we're going to get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is rotate my canvas to the portrait orientation. We're going to go to the colors, first color on the top row, and I'm going to drag from the color circle into the canvas and it flood fills. Now this is going to be the darkest color we've got for the sky, but we're going to immediately go to our layers, click the plus symbol, create a new layer, and then we're going to go to the second color on the top row. We're going to go to our brushes, we're going to go to airbrushing, soft brush. I'm going to put the brush size pretty big, maybe about 50% and 100% opacity, and then straight through the center of the canvas, I'm going to do a band of this. I'm then going to go to the tools up here, I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to slide this across to 70%, which is pretty significant. And then I immediately go to the layer, slide, and duplicate it, which just amplifies it. Just in the interest of keeping the layer number down, we're going to tap on the top version and merge down. I'm going to go and create another layer. Go to our colors again, the third color on the top row. Still with a soft brush, with an airbrushing. I'm going to turn it down maybe to 40%. And this time, a little bit under the halfway point, we're going to do a band of this color. So you can see there's more space at the top than there is at the bottom, but not by much. Adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur it again to about 70. Deselect, go to our layers, create a new layer, layer 4, go to the fourth color on the top row, and still with the soft brush, with an airbrushing, I'm going to put it down to maybe 25%, size, still 100% opacity, and then about a third of the way this time, we're going to do a band of this color. Again, the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur this in, this time only to about 50%, and deselect. Now we've got a nice color gradient to work with. I'm going to go to my layers, create a new layer, layer 5, and I'm going to go in with the fifth color. Predictably, still the soft brush with an airbrushing. We're going to put it down really quite small by comparison, so 10% size, 100% opacity. And then just about on this third line, or third of the way up, hold it until it snaps to a straight line this time, do it horizontally, and then adjustments, Gaussian blur, and blur that in, so 40%. And then going to go and create a new layer, layer 6, stay with the same color, but with this time we're going to go to the Elements Clouds brush. I'm going to put the brush size pretty big, about 25%, and about 30% strength. opacity, and we're just going to start building in some kind of more mottled appearance with this brush. Just tapping it in, building up some of that pink colour, just with a little bit more texture this time, but not much. Only up to about here, about halfway. I'm then going to stay on the same layer, but I'll go to the 6th colour, and then in the centre, just tap this in a little bit. Turn the size of the brush down 15%, and start to work sideways a little bit as well. Stay on the same layer, go to the 7th colour. In the centre, start to build in some of this brighter colour. Just in the centre there, not too much. We're just building in the beginning of the impression of a bright light coming from this source. Go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and we are going to blur all of that to about the 10% and deselect. Now, before we get any more detailed with that, I'm going to add some stars into the sky. So I'm going to go to my layers, create a new layer, layer 7, tap on the little N, scroll down to the Add Blend mode. I'm going to go to the Luminance Light Pen for the brush. We'll just trace back one, so we'll go back to the 6th colour. I'm going to put the brush size about 30% and let's go for 100% opacity. And I'm going to start in the top corner. I'm going to put my palm down on the screen. I'm going to start doing some points in the sky. So it is pressure sensitive still. So sometimes you can press on more and you get something much more dramatic. But for most of it, I'm barely letting it touch the screen. Now I want to keep these quite random. So sometimes they'll cluster together. Sometimes there'll be big gaps between them. Try to vary it up. I want to go really intense with the stars for this scene. But you don't need to hand draw every single one. But you do need to start with that. So you certainly in the top corner, for example, need to do a good number of them to start us off. I would typically aim for kind of like a square of them. So imagine an imaginary line, a rough kind of rectangle of stars, and then we can use that to duplicate it and speed the process up. Now, if you've seen any of my other tutorials, you'd be familiar with this method, and it's quite quick, but it just takes a few duplications. So once we've got a good spread of stars like this, then we can go to that layer, slide and duplicate the layer, transform, and then we can move it to another area. We can even go down here and we can maybe flip it horizontally, flip it vertically, just so it keeps some of that random quality. Match it up, deselect, zoom out, and we can take that top version, merge down, so it's all on one layer, and you instantly have doubled the number of stars, so we can now slide and duplicate that layer again, transform, flip vertically, flip horizontally, and then perhaps move it somewhere different. We can even go on the freeform and shrink it down, spread it, stretch it, however we want to make it fit. So I'm going to bring it down probably. Find another location like that, and then we can tap on it, merge down, slide, duplicate again, transform, freeform, maybe stretch it out, flip it horizontally, deselect, tap on the top version, merge down, slide, duplicate, transform, flip it horizontally, flip it vertically, maybe move it down, adjust the canvas so you can see where you're putting things. When it gets to these lower areas, we're probably going to have to erase some of those stars, but for now, it's fine. Deselect, go to the layers, tap on the top version, merge down again, so it's all still in one layer. slide and duplicate, transform, maybe flip it vertically. What you will tend to notice if you don't move it around is you get kind of patterns emerging. You can see symmetry. So you will need to go and move it around, whatever you need to just make that less apparent. Stretch it out, that normally helps. Keep flipping it vertically and horizontally until we eliminate some of that, or just start to put it in some of the corners. Because I want there to be more stars in the upper region, what I might do with this layer is just maybe place it in that top right corner, deselect. On this layer, slide and duplicate it, transform, flip it horizontally and vertically, and then move that over to the other side as well. Take the top two versions of layer 7, not the bottom one. So tap on that one, merge down. We've got extra stars up there. I don't want them to be as bright as the ones underpinning it, so I'm going to tap on the N. Gives us the opacity slider, and maybe we can put it about 70%. And it's just a little bit more subdued compared to the other ones. And that's a good starting point for us. So we'll tap on the layers, tap on the top one, merge down. Now, if there's any of the stars that I think are just too many of them, you can always go in with the eraser. Put it to the medium brush with an airbrushing. Put it really quite small, 2%, 100% opacity. And if there's any of them that you just don't want to be there anymore, you can go in and remove them. If you feel like there's just too many, then that's not a problem. Some of these larger pink ones, I think perhaps there's too many of those, so have a little bit of editing. Remove them if they're too much, they're too close to each other perhaps. We've got it all on one layer. Likewise, we can continue to add stars, so if we wanted to add a couple of more dramatic ones in there, we could perhaps go to maybe the third colour on the top row, still with the light pen. 30% size, 100% opacity, and then you can just go in there and add one or two in a slightly cooler colour that will just really pop. I wouldn't recommend you do too many of these though, just a few. As I said before, we need to remove some of them in that bottom area. We've got atmosphere, we've got clouds, so it's going to obscure those, so we're going to go in with the eraser. Set to the soft brush with an airbrushing. Let's put it at 10% size, 50% strength, and we can just go and erase some of these lower ones. We don't want them to kind of disappear into the clouds there a little bit. I think that would be better. And then just lightly graze it as you go further up so that they softly start to disappear there. And then obviously they're stronger at the top. And then I'm going to go back to my layers, back to layer 6, underneath the stars, create a new layer there. So the new layer is underneath the stars. On this layer, I'm going to tap on the little N, scroll down to the Add Blend Mode. I'm going to go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, and I'm going to select the second colour on the top row. I'm going to put the brush size maybe at 5%, maybe about 20% strength, and then we want kind of like a channel, almost like the Milky Way. Want some just taps and textures of this, build in some luminance. So a real stripe of this coming down, not in a straight line, more kind of diagonally. Just tap some of this in to begin with, create some texture, and then dark section in the middle. And then a few points of texture as we come down. Then we can turn the size of the brush up, 10%, and just start to circle very, very, very lightly. I'm just allowing, because it is pressure sensitive, I could press quite hard and you can see that much more clearly. So I'm just circling it in very lightly. Over on this side, allow it to kind of fade out, and the same on this side. Just lightly circle it. We can bring it down so it kind of merges with the pinks. Same over on this side. And it doesn't take very much to start building in a real lovely kind of Milky Way effect. We want a channel of kind of darkness. We're also going to add the lightest colours in that centre as well. We want a nice contrast in that centre. So just circling in, keeping it kind of random. Once it's smoothed out to a point, but allow some texture to build in there as well. I'm going to try a different colour. Go for the fourth colour on the top row. And as we come further down, perhaps we need to turn that size of the brush down to 5%. And then just some taps of this starting to merge down here. That is quite strong still, so let's turn that down even more. So let's put it to 10%. Bit tricky with the sliders, but there you go. Tap in. We want to create a model look. It's going to be to some extent obscured by the tree that we're going to add into our scene, but it's a good idea to have it there and the background behind it anyway. Just creating some textures down here. Bring some of it up. Let's put it up 10%. Build up some of the light up here as well. Go over it, blend it in a bit more. I'm going to change brushes. I'm going to go to the clouds brush within elements. I'm going to go in with the 5th color on the top row, 10% size, 30% strength, and then it just gives a bit more texture inherently. Saves us some effort having to put every point of texture in there. It's quite a useful brush. It's got that kind of cloud-like texture, obviously. Circle it in as we come up. Now yours will look somewhat different than mine, and that's okay. Doesn't need to be exactly the same. A lot of my tutorials, I give you the general techniques, but it doesn't have to look identical. So don't fixate on it looking completely the same. That's not really necessary. And takes the fun out of it as well. Give yourself a little bit of freedom to explore this and create your own version. Circle this in. Let's turn it down a little bit from 10 to 5%. And a couple of these areas, I'm just going to go over them a bit more. Have them kind of ramped up, make them a bit more intense. Use the textures that are already starting to build in. We can go over them a bit. I think I'm going to concentrate on one side. I'm going to have it a bit more subtle on this side. We've got a dark channel through the center, and I'm going to allow it to be brighter on one side mainly. So again, just kind of going around, adding some of this texture in, and that's starting to work quite nicely. Might go for a brighter color. So let's go for this 7th color. Turn it down even more. 3% size, 30% strength. Let's zoom in. Let's start to build in some really strong brightness into this area. So go for something that's already quite light anyway, and then you can start to work in the center of it and really build in that brightness. Come down, find a bright area, and start to build in. So you want it to look a little bit kind of fragmented, so you get in some areas that we can really ramp up, and you get this kind of textured look. Keep zooming out, checking. Let's move up here. We don't want it all in one area. It can be dispersed and spread around a little bit. That's starting to look quite nice, I think. Have a real concentration in this area. Just go over it a few times maybe. And another one here. We can change to the airbrushing soft brush. 5% size, 20% strength, and we can just go over that area and build in a glow, just circle it in. Really builds it up a little bit more. Now we're starting to get a little bit bleached out with the colours, so we probably need to go a bit stronger with the colours again. So we'll go to the 2nd colour, blue. Let's not lose some of that nice, vibrant, rich colour. So we can circle over it a little bit, build in some of that really saturated look. A bit more over on this side as well. Again, I'm not pressing too hard, but if you keep going over and over it, then it will build it in. Let's zoom out. I quite like that effect. 5th colour. Again, let's build in some of this colour. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in with the eraser, put the eraser on the Elements Clouds brush, maybe 5% size and 60% strength. And it gives me the ability to just go in there and remove sections, maybe turn it down a little bit more, 3%. And I can add more texture in here as well. So imagine this dark band has kind of form and structure as well. So we can go in there and disrupt. Imagine it has a mass of its own, so it goes in there, almost like clouds, I suppose. We can go in there and just remove some of that glow in places, but again, go lightly with it. Again, we can just add some kind of suggestions and fragments of this as well. Perhaps it's a little bit strong at 50. Let's put it down to 40. And just disrupt some of that glow. It's a little bit soft going in with this eraser, just gives it a little sharpness, a little bit of clarity here and there. Just breaks it up a little bit, which I think has a beneficial effect. I'm going to go on this layer, create a new layer above it, and again change the blend mode from normal to add. Sometimes adding a second layer with the blend mode helps us ramp up the glow and brightness even more effectively. So I'm going to go in with the 5th color, with the soft brush, with an airbrushing, 5% size, maybe 20% strength, and then we can go over here and you can see how it just pushes more effectively that brightness. Really blows it out a little bit more in a way that I think is really quite effective. And bring this down, tapping lightly like this. Just a few taps. I think we're starting to get there with the overall texture that I was looking for. Maybe go back to the second color, that really vibrant blue, and we can build it up even more up here. Just lightly scribble it in, really. The effect of scribbling is that it gives a little bit of texture, keeps it kind of soft, but it builds in a little bit of that kind of random look. Do it on either side, keep that, or some of that darkness in the center anyway. You can encroach up on it a little bit, but just to soften it in slightly, but not too much. I definitely want it to be brighter on either side of it. I think we're pretty much there as a foundation point now to work from. Okay, I'm going to create a new layer, layer 10. Again, it's all underneath the stars. Again, change the blend mode to add. I'm going to go in with the 6th color on the top row, still with the soft brush, with an airbrushing, maybe about 7% size and 10% strength. And just at this bottom area where it starts to just meet this band of purple, I'm just going to circle in or build in this glow down here. And I'm going to expand it, push it either direction, left and right. Maybe turn it up a little bit, 10%, down to 5% opacity. Push it either direction, left and right. Something like this. And then just circle it in where it meets that line there as well. Really build in that glow. But we've also created something of a horizon line to meet it. Okay, we're going to start working on the lower portion of this image now. If you're liking this tutorial so far, I'd just like to ask at this point, if you're enjoying the video, please give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe and the bell notification. It really helps it in the YouTube's algorithm. Also, a comment is super useful. Really appreciate if you could help out the channel in that way. Thank you so much. Next, I'm going to work on the lower area of the image. Now, the easiest way to move forward is to go to the wrench, add, copy canvas and paste. And it's put the whole image as a thumbnail now, which you won't see if I untick it, but it is there. On this image, I'm going to go to this selection, rectangle, and I just want to remove the bottom section. So I'm going to start the box on that horizon line and just grab the bottom section. Then go to that layer, tap on it and clear, and you barely see it, but it has reduced the size of that overall image. And then we can go to the transform, flip vertically and bring it down here. Now I'm going to squash it a little bit, so put it on freeform, squash it together quite dramatically. So I want it to pretty much be squashed into that shape that's available down there, like that. And that already is quite effective for giving us a horizon line and sort of setting the stage for everything else, but it's too clear. So we're going to go to the adjustments, motion blur, and slide it to the side to about the 40% and deselect. And that alone almost gives the effect of water, and it's just really useful. Now we've got this inserted image. I'm going to go to the layer underneath it and create a new layer, layer 12, but it is underneath that inserted image. On this layer, I'm going to go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to go to the fourth color on the top row, 4% size, say, and maybe about 20% strength. And then I'm just going to start building in some of this color above that horizon line. I've done the layer underneath, so it preserves some of that sharpness where it meets the water. It's not to say we're going to keep it that sharp, but we don't want to completely lose it straight away. I'm allowing it to bank up a little bit more, rise up a little bit higher at the edges. As it comes towards the center, I want less of this dark tone. Perhaps go for an even darker color. We'll go for the second color, especially at the edges. Not so much in the middle. I'm also going to turn it down to 2% size and 10% strength. Just build in some bands of maybe cloud up here. Just a little bit more texture. Not too much. Something like this. I might go in with the sixth color, 5% size, and I'm just going to slightly subdue that glow, but not by too much. It's a little bit fierce down there at the bottom, so just going to slightly soften it in, but only a little bit. Something like that. Now we've got really too vibrant a color on that inserted image down there, so I'm going to go on that layer, maybe just with the same color, just eliminate some of that brightest white in the very center. In fact, I'll go to that layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock so that it won't extend into other areas too much, and I can just go over it, subdue it slightly, maybe go in with a slightly darker color, so the fifth color. I don't need it to be quite so vibrant. Maybe go for an even more subdued color, so the fourth color. And certainly at the edges, just like we had the darker section above, at the edges we're going to subdue this a little bit as well. Okay, I'm going to go to the inserted image. I'm going to create a layer above it. I'm going to tap on it and put on the clipping mask, which links it to this inserted image, which means it will stop at the boundary, which is perfect. I'm actually going to use a different brush than I initially mentioned. I'm going to go with an artistic, the leatherwood brush. And if you tap on it and go to stroke path, I'll put the spacing up to 45%, which separates some of the little particles of that texture. I'm going to go to the second color on the top row, and you see I can't add it in here, which is the point of the clipping mask. It'll only start to appear once I add it into this area. I'm just going to do some sweeps across and press on more as you come further down, and it gets more dramatic. I'm going to mix in some different colors, so I'm going to use the fourth color on the top row. Maybe a lighter color as well, so I'll go for the fifth color. Then we're going to go to the adjustments, motion blur, and we're going to try and keep it as a horizontal line as we slide it across. We're going to do it pretty significantly to 100%, and if you go up and down it blurs it in different ways, so you need to just try to keep it so it's as horizontal as you possibly can, something like that. And it's suggestive of kind of waves in the water, but we've lost some of that glow, so we're going to go to our layers and create a layer above that. Tap on it and put on the clipping mask. Again, it links it to the inserted image. On this new layer, tap on the N, scroll down to the add. We're still going to use the leatherwood brush. We're going to go to the fifth color. For what it's worth, it's going to be almost white in its effect anyway. And then in this center area, we've got the light up here, so we're going to have it reflecting on the surface here. Bring it down, not too far. Again, adjustments, motion blur, slide it to the side. Doesn't need to go as far this time, maybe about 50%. Deselect. And that's done something to represent some of the reflection in the water. Okay, I'm going to go to the very top and create a new layer above that. So we're above the stars at this point. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing medium brush, go to my colors. I'm going to use the first color on the middle row. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to put it to maybe just into the 2% size and about 70% strength. And we can see still roughly where the horizon line is. We're not going to work quite there. We're going to come down a little bit from that. In fact, it needs to be even smaller. So 1%. And we're just creating a little area of land, the bottom of which needs to be relatively flat. But then above that, you can start to have some rocks, some organic matter building up here. So maybe just building that straight line first, all the way to the edge. If you're struggling to do that, just do a point there all the way to the side and hold it. And then it gives you a straight line. And then you've got the freedom to go above that at that point. In fact, you could even go to something like the organic rainforest brush, which I'm just going to reset. You can see it bunches it together even more. 2% size, 100% opacity, and then it gives you the freedom to work above that line. Have some organic things up here. Just be careful when you go to meet that line. Something like this. I'm going to go to that layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. I'm going to change color. Got a green, the second color on the middle row. Turn it down, low on the 2% size, still at 100% opacity, and I can mix in some slightly more hints of green in there as well. Back to our colors, maybe the fourth color on the bottom row. Add some highlights in there. This is relatively just background stuff, so you don't need to worry too much. And that's sufficient enough detail for the trees. I'm going to go to the fourth color. I'm going to switch brush. I'm going to go for the airbrushing medium brush. 1% size, 30% strength. And then at the bottom part of this, I'm just going to introduce maybe some lumps and shapes that could represent rocks. You don't need to have a lot of detail for this. And that's probably sufficient. It's suggestive of detail, but we're going to have more things here that are a lot more detailed, so don't worry too much about that area. I'm going to tap on it and turn off the alpha lock. Back to the first color, and maybe just do something else here as well. So it's not just one little detail, it could be a couple of layers of it. Put it to 100% opacity. Something like that. I'm going to stay on the same layer. I'm going to go for a darker color. So we're going to go for the third color on the middle row. Still with the same brush, so the medium brush with an airbrushing. 5% size, 100% opacity, and we're going to build in an area now that is much closer. In fact, we could even go to the medium hard brush just for that sharpness on the edge. Again, 100% opacity. We're at, let's put it down actually, let's put it to 3% size. Building a nice rock here. Again, just go along the edge, sharpen it up a little bit. And it's a lot darker because it's closer to us, so the black colours are going to be much more prominent. Although that is going to be dark because it's in the background with atmosphere, it appears kind of blue and lighter. So I have that as a nice background rock here. Go to that layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. I'm going to go to the charcoal, burnt tree brush. Go to my colours. I'm going to use the fourth colour on the middle row. 12% size, but quite low on the opacity, so maybe 15% opacity. And just at the top edge of that, but quite low on the opacity, so maybe about 30% would do. And just at the top edge, I'm going to build in some texture with this. just build in some nice textures for the rock. Then I'm going to switch to the airbrushing. We'll go for the medium brush, lower on that 2% size, maybe about 75% opacity. And then just at that top edge, and remember we've got the alpha lock on, so you can't add it anywhere other than the rock. We can just run along that top edge to begin with, eliminate some of that darkness, and then back from the edge, we can just have some bits where the light is catching the rock as well. But not too much, just some straight edges and lines. And then we can go for a lighter colour. Let's go for the 5th colour. Just some points. So just a few points of this. And that's probably enough for that rock. Go to our layers. We'll create a layer above that, layer 16. We'll go for this dark colour, the 6th. We'll go in with the medium hard brush. Maybe 3% size, 100% opacity, and it's going to cut in front of that, and that's fine. Don't do anything too dramatic there. You can't really see it. In fact, maybe we could just deselect layer 15 so that we can just check that edge and put it back in. And I'm going to have it coming down and then swelling up a little bit more. I want a kind of an outcrop, a little bit of rock for the tree to grow from and for it to be really central. So I want a little raised section for the tree. Scribble it in, doesn't really need to be neat. Build it all the way to the edge. Let's put it up a little bit for this, 7% or so. And I'm going to have it completely covering this lower section. And as we come over here, we need to be a little bit more controlled. So down 3%. So I've had this bit where it raises up, maybe a little bit more. And then it comes down here into the water again. So just have it sinking back down again. Maybe turn it down even more. 2%. And we can really control the edge. It's 100% opacity. So just be a little bit careful. Have some round features here. Maybe there's another section that just creeps out. Again, up. Have some little stones on their own as well. Bring it across. Maybe there's another edge here, so another stone that sticks out. Again, they don't need to be exactly the same as mine, but I'm just obviously demonstrating it as an example. The good thing about natural shapes and forms is that they don't have to match exactly as I'm showing you. You can do your own version. As long as you're using similar colours, or the same colours and similar effects rather, then it gives you a little bit of freedom to just explore some of it on your own. Maybe there's another big rock structure here coming in from this side. Just circling it in. Sometimes scribbling is exactly the kind of technique you need, just to keep you loose, create some of those shapes without worrying too much. And then maybe another one down here to kind of join in a little bit as well. So that's quite nice. I'm going to switch to the soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to put it to 3% size, 30% strength, and well, points at where it meets the water, you're going to get shadows and just an obscuring of that bottom edge. Some of these stones and rocks. So it really doesn't need to be as neat there anyway. Turn it down, 2%. The top edge needs to be relatively neat, but where it meets the water, less so. Something like that. I can then go to that layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. We'll go in with the charcoal, burnt tree. I'm going to go in with the 4th colour on the bottom row. I'm going to put it pretty big actually, so maybe 15% size, but maybe about 20% strength to begin with. And then we can just start to build in some texture. It's going to be pretty subtle to begin with, and that's perfect. Just some general texture all the way around. Rocks are quite tricky to do, but this is quite a useful texture. Get some of that, if I zoom in, get some of the real kind of textures in there without a great deal of effort. So just build it all the way around to begin with. Try to describe some of those shapes a little bit. So for example, I might turn that down maybe to 5%, and we've got a little bit of a rock you can imagine here. You can see the edge of it. So maybe just go in from that edge and build it in more here. Another smaller one here maybe. And the top edge of this one. And it's really subtle to begin with. And you can start to get a sense of the kind of 3D quality of some of these shapes now. I'm going to put the opacity up to maybe about 40%. And now you can work in there a little bit more. Perhaps put the brush size back up again. 10%. Maybe work in this upper area to begin with. And redefining that top edge. And you'll notice it more now by contrast to the rocks behind it. Just tapping it in kind of quite randomly around the rock area. Preferencing the top edge of the rocks, they need more of that highlight obviously. So we've got more shapes here. And you're starting to get a sense of it. Back to the colours, I'm going to go for the 5th colour. And this is a much brighter colour, so just be a little bit more careful with this colour now. So there's definitely going to be some areas that really catch the light a little bit more. Let's just tap it in and around. We're still at the 10% size. Quite rough at this stage. And I'm going to turn it down. 4% size maybe. Just going to really start to add quite a lot of the highlight at the top edges. Okay, so that's a good start, but I'm now going to refine it a little bit, be a bit more controlled. So I'm going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush. 2% size, maybe 30% strength. And we can go in and we can add some angles in here now. In fact, even smaller. 1% size. In and amongst here, you can just add some straight lines. Highlight some of the top surfaces of this stone. Bring in some angles. So you've got the texture. And now it's just a case of building in some of the highlights. And separating some of the shapes is really important as well. So maybe got a section here where we need a sharper edge along the top. Can block in some sections. Some little straight lines coming in at different angles. Move over to this one. Again, change the angles up. More highlights at the top. Zoom in. Top edge. We want to get rid of any of that sharp black at the very top. Create some top of round shapes, some stones. Maybe go for the 3rd colour on the bottom row. 1% size, 30% strength, and we can just again start to ramp up some of these top edges. Maybe this section here, we've got a tree, and you know, it's not, because it's behind a shape, it's not going to catch the light quite as much. So you just need to be thinking about how the light would impact. Add some little random sections across the scene. I think for this whole section it's relatively flat, so you're gonna get a lot more light dispersed and reflecting back across this section. So I'm going over and giving that quite a lot of this texture. Again, it's not overly controlled really. I think it's just about building up the effect. This bit especially I want to add a lot of light to. I think it looks better for it. Add some over on this one. Top edges are little stones too. Build it up. Just takes a few minutes really to create quite a pleasing effect, I think. Okay, we might come back and add some more details to the stones, but we're going to have to add in the main focal point, which is the tree. So I'm going to go to my layers, create a new layer, layer 17. Going to go in with the inking studio pen. I think rather than using that last color, I'm going to go in with the 6th color on the middle row, 100% size, 100% opacity. And then from this point, I'm just going to build in base of the tree. I'm just going to cut straight through the center. And then I'm creating almost like a subtle S kind of curve, and it's pressure sensitive, so the less you press, the more it thins out the line. So twist and turn that tree trunk. Press lightly, the little branches start to disappear. Add some kind of corners and wiggles to this. Generally speaking, branches will just get thinner and thinner the further they go up a tree. So try to keep that as a consistent thing as it just gets thinner. So press more and then press lightly as it goes further up. And much of this is going to be obscured by the foliage anyway, so don't worry too much, but try to get a decent kind of branch structure in there to begin with. And bear in mind, we don't want it too tall, so we can always, if you've gone too tall straight away, you can go to the transform, freeform, squash it down a bit. In fact, I'm going to reduce it in size quite a bit. I kind of want this section of the sky to still remain, so I want this to be a relatively smaller feature. I've gone a little bit too large there straight away, so that's fine, it's easy to fix. I'm going to turn the size of that brush down to maybe 30% now, so it can be a little bit more controlled. Do some branches up here though. Like I say, most of it is going to be obscured anyway, but we'll put them in there to begin with. Maybe just a couple of smaller ones lower down. I'm going to keep that as the basic branch structure. I'm going to stay on the same layer, but I'm going to go to the organic rainforest brush. I'm going to tap on it. I'm going to put the spacing within stroke path up to 45%. Click done. And then around this now, so 100% opacity and 2% size. And we're just going to start adding the foliage to our tree. Keep it relatively patchy. Again, keep zooming out, checking how it works with the overall scene. You can circle it in, scribble it in, tap it in, whatever seems to work. We're using the branch structures as a general guide. Wherever you've got a lot of branches, you definitely need to add the foliage. I want to avoid making it a complete kind of neat circle. Make it look a little bit too uninteresting if it's completely just a round shape, so keep it a little bit more random than that. Circle it in, and this is mainly just going to be a silhouette. There's not a lot we need to add to this beyond the silhouette. We are obscuring some of the background now, and that's fine. Tap it in places around the edges. It's a pretty easy technique really with this brush. It does most of the heavy lifting for us, which is really great. A bit more of a concentration at the top. Scribble it in. We definitely want gaps, but it doesn't need to be too much. And if you've struggled with the branches, well, you know, it's a good chance to just cover up little bits you're not happy with anyway, so go for that. Bit more here. Now, because this brush has a certain amount of opacity to it, one thing we could do is we can go to that layer and slide and duplicate it, and it just makes it a little bit bolder, makes it more consistently dark throughout the texture, which is quite useful. I'm going to tap on that top version and merge down, so it's on one layer again. I'm going to tap on it and put on the alpha lock. I'm going to go to my colours. I've got a couple of colours which you can probably barely see on camera, but they are there. I'm going to go to the 7th colour. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush, and it's a subtle effect I'm going for. 3% size, maybe 20% strength. I just want to introduce a bit of colour in there. There's a lot of light coming in here, so it would kind of illuminate some of the colour of the tree. So it's just a little hint of green. It shouldn't be completely colourless, but it is super subtle really. You'll only notice it when you zoom in, just a hint more green. Maybe put it up a little bit more, 30%. And then we've also got our kind of warm colour here, which is the 6th colour. Again, super subtle. But we might even want to put that up a bit more, so 50%. Just to warm up the tree trunk. And it's kind of bathed in light there a little bit. And it is really subtle. Stay on that same layer. I'm going to go in with maybe the 4th colour on the middle row. Airbrushing soft brush. Turn it down. 1% size. 50% strength. And I'm just going to add some highlights in here. Just to some extent on the tree trunk. But not too much. Just a hint of it so it isn't completely flat looking. Go back to layer 16 and continue that down from the tree. And I think that builds it together quite effectively. There's a little bit there, it looks a bit thick, so I'm going to go back to layer 17 with the eraser, put the eraser on the airbrushing medium hard brush, 2% size, 100% opacity, and just chip away that a little bit. And I think I prefer the look of that. Now with that tree, again, you can go to the transform, and you know, we have obscured some really nice detail there in the background, but like I say, it's just part of the process sometimes. But if you wanted to adjust it, make it smaller in size, so you reveal more of that background, if you wanted to, then that's absolutely fine to do. You just got to find the right place for it. So it's a balance between different elements. I think maybe that works. It's a little bit smaller in the scene, but reveals a little bit of that background a bit more. From the top layer, I'm creating a new layer, layer 18, change the blend mode from normal to add. And then just one or two places, I'm going to ramp up the highlights a little bit. Especially in the central area where the light's really going to hit it. Don't need to do too much of this though. Again, create another layer, layer 19, and on this layer I'm going to go in with the 10th colour on the middle row, with the soft brush with an airbrushing, 2% size, 20% strength, and I'm just going to introduce some dark colour. In fact, a bit higher. Let's go for 3%. Let's introduce some blue in here, darken it up a little bit. I might put it underneath the rocks. So let's go underneath layer 16. So we're not going to be destructive of the rocks, but we definitely need to darken up some of this. Maybe also go in with the 9th colour. Whoops. 3%. Add some texture in here as well. Turn it down more. 2%. Alternate between that colour and the blue colour. 10th colour. I'm going to go back to layer 14. I'm going to go in with the soft brush, with an airbrushing, and I'm going to go for the 6th colour. 10% size, 20% strength. I'm just going to add a bit more of this glow into the water. And then I'm also going to go back to layer 12, create a layer above that, tap on the N, scroll down to add, and do the same thing there as well. And it's just brought out the glow a little bit more, which I think is useful. Okay, I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. Don't forget to hit subscribe, give the video a thumbs up if you've enjoyed, and I shall see you back here soon. Bye for now.